We all know how big of a deal World of Warcraft was in 2004. It wasn't just another successful MMO, it became the MMO. For years it completely dominated the genre, and even today, despite no longer being the unstoppable giant it once was, it's still probably the biggest name in MMORPGs. And we all know the story. World of Warcraft changed everything. It pulled millions of players away from every other MMO on the market. Entire studios watched their player base disappear overnight. A huge succubus of players, as Richard Vogel described it.
But there was one unfortunate thing. The unfortunate thing was it launched right when WoW launched.
Yeah.
So WoW brought the whole industry down, not just us. Every online game out there went down as soon as WoW went out. WoW was like a huge succubus of players went over there and drove into WoW. And it drove all our numbers down, but it didn't help.
In many ways though, that success came with a cost, a huge cost. When one single game dominates an entire genre for years, innovation and diversity slow down by a lot. Competitors die and disappear, studios shut down or just move on to other kinds of projects. And the genre ends up revolving around this single giant. I truly believe that's one of the reasons the MMO genre is in this horrible state today. Because World of Warcraft took all the light, and for so many years there just wasn't any room for other games to properly grow, and that wound is still alive and still bleeding today. But that's a discussion for another video, so if you are curious about the awful side effects that the success of World of Warcraft generated from 2004 to 2010 on the entire genre, sub to the channel. Kiss you. That is always what we hear though, right? About the success of World of Warcraft, but that is not even half of the actual story. Whenever people talk about vanilla World of Warcraft, they focus on what it did to the MMO genre, which is true, it is a testament of how great it was, but is that the whole picture? Is that all that matters in this context? Are there no other feats of strength? Far from it, because while World of Warcraft had to compete with other MMOs and won that competition by a landslide, it actually had to do a lot more than that. There are three other huge aspects that no one seems to mention, and I think you have to keep them in mind at all times to truly understand why this game is still underrated despite its legendary status. Let's talk about them. First of all, before World of Warcraft, the MMO genre was a thing, but it wasn't a big one. Among the biggest MMOs at the time, there were only about 4 million paying subscribers combined. To put that into perspective, that's less than GTA Vice City sold in about 3 months after its release. One single game in only 3 months. So yes, World of Warcraft had to compete with other MMOs like Ultima Online, EverQuest, RuneScape, Lineage and so on, but it was also launching into a space that had never really proven its potential. The genre wasn't culturally established yet, people did not really trust it and they were not really interested in it yet. If most gamers have never even considered playing an MMO before, it's much harder to convince them to try one. If you and none of your friends, for example, have ever played a racing game, you naturally exist inside of a bubble where news and hype about racing games don't even reach you. You might actually like Need for Speed Underground, of course you would, but the game is still going to have a much harder time reaching you in the first place. And that's exactly where MMOs were before World of Warcraft. Most people simply weren't playing them. The entire gaming industry existed inside this bubble where new MMOs had a really hard time generating any kind of mainstream hype. Blizzard wasn't just competing with other MMORPGs, it was fighting against an industry where this type of game wasn't really meant to succeed. Yet. And it's not like Blizzard didn't believe this or they had some other kind of idea. Their estimate before launch was that they were going to get about 500k subs, and their absolute best case scenario, as they predicted it, was a final peak of about 1 million subscribers. That was indeed ambitious. People like to talk about this fact and be like, wow, Blizzard was so humble. But they weren't humble. To believe you are going to have 500k to 1 million subs during that period of time shows a lot of confidence actually, because those numbers could easily place you in the top 3, possibly even at the number 1 spot if you get those numbers by also stealing a bit from other competitors, which you would inevitably do. They were not humble, they were just realistic, they were confident, they knew the genre and how it was, they believed in themselves, they believed that they could do a great job, They knew that the Warcraft IP is gonna be helpful. They even believed that they could go toe to toe with the best the genre had to offer. But to believe that you could not just do that, but fundamentally break the genre, would have been a bit delusional, and yet that is exactly what they did. And I also want to mention this quickly before we move on to the next point, because it really is worth mentioning, but you also have to keep in mind that the Warcraft fans were not super hyped about World of Warcraft either. People really loved StarCraft, people really loved Diablo, and people really loved Warcraft 3. Most gamers in general did not really vibe with the idea of MMOs, as we discussed already, but the first target audience of World of Warcraft, the already existing fans of Blizzard, many of them did not like this sudden and huge change that their favorite universe was taking. It is a very weird kind of moment, right? Just think about it. Imagine you are a fan of any kind of franchise. I don't know, Halo, for example. And you hear that, you know what? We are not gonna make any other shooter games in the Halo universe. The next game is actually an open world third-person RPG. That's weird as hell. The fact that the Warcraft universe was behind the MMO was gonna help them massively later 100%. But before launch, I don't know, it also created a lot of negativity around the game, which is really not good. But they managed to get past that as well. But the biggest factor that Blizzard had to overcome, and once again they absolutely did that and nobody talks about it, is the fact that the game was released in goddamn 2004. 2004 is in many ways a very dark year in gaming's history, because holy shit, the games that came out of this year in general, is on steroids. It's a mutant. Great games were released in 2004, like Beyond Good and Evil or Vampire the Masquerade. But they died because in 2004 you were either a beast of a game or you got forgotten. There was no room to be just okay, to have some flaws here and there. You had to be spectacular. Here are only some of the games released in that insane year. GTA San Andreas, the best-selling game of that entire generation. GTA Vice City was pissing on the MMO genre before that. Well, GTA San Andreas was pissing on GTA Vice City. Half-Life 2. I don't even know what to say here. It is Half-Life 2. One of the very few games that still keeps popping up constantly when people talk about the best game ever made. Halo 2, a game that made $130 million in less than 24 hours. And by the way, Half-Life 2, Halo 2, Counter-Strike Source, EverQuest and World of Warcraft all released within a 22-day window. Let's continue. Far Cry 1, Fable, Doom 3, say whatever you want, but Sims 2 as well, Metal Gear Solid 3, Counter-Strike Source, Prince of Persia Warrior Within, forgotten today but it was gigantic back then. Should I keep going? Steam itself launched in late 2003 and Half-Life 2 forced millions of players onto it in 2004. PC gamers were already experiencing one of the biggest platform shifts in the history of gaming, while World of Warcraft was trying to convince them to start paying a monthly subscription, which even back then it was weird. Early 2005 was also gonna be a direct competitor to World of Warcraft, since World of Warcraft released in late 2004. What was released in the first half of 2005? Resident Evil 4, God of War, and Guild Wars 1. Imagine releasing a game in the most underdeveloped genre during this period of time. Established franchises were releasing good games and they were dying left and right because of how insane the competition was. Yet somehow, World of Warcraft managed to not just survive but dominate. Do you realize how good a game must be to do that? The 6 months before World of Warcraft and the 6 months after World of Warcraft are to this day, in my opinion, the most stacked 12 months in gaming history. I have no idea what the developers of the industry were on during that time, but goddamn they need to give a lot of it to the developers of today, cause man, it's not even close to how good it used to be. Like, think of good games that were deeply impacted by their release window. Something like Titanfall 2. Great game, most people would agree. It just released between Battlefield 1 and Infinite Warfare. Sucks, unlucky I guess. Take that situation, make it 100 times worse, and that is what World of Warcraft and most games of the period had to go through. So World of Warcraft came into an unproven genre with a tiny audience compared to the other ones and managed to be, in some ways, the most successful game of that year while competing in this insane race. And I know what some of you might say, well, beyond EverQuest 2 and Guild Wars 1, those games were not competing with World of Warcraft, but you are wrong. First of all, EverQuest 2 and Guild Wars 1. That's it. Yeah, it would already be a worthy fight, not the easiest launch window to compete in. Also, the other MMOs were still there. It's not like Star Wars Galaxies, the original EverQuest, or RuneScape were not direct competitors anymore. But even from other games, Halo 2 sucked in so many people over a very long period of time because of its multiplayer. It was not a one and done thing. Same with Counter-Strike Source and many others. Plus, then you had games like Fable or GTA San Andreas that, while not multiplayer, got a lot of hours out of the millions of people that played them. And even though the other games did not take so much time, when the year is peppered all over the place with stuff like Half-Life 2, Far Cry or God of War, well, combine the time all of us spent playing all those games, and again, that is a huge focus detractor. Maybe just some of them were multiplayer games where you could sink countless hours in, but even if they were not, when the quality is this freaking high overall, all games act as direct competitors to each other. It's like saying releasing a new MMO on the same day as GTA 6 is not gonna be a problem because they are different games. But it does not work like that, of course, because at a certain point, the genres of the games don't matter anymore. And lastly, the subscription and the always online requirement. Man, it was an insane ask for the average gamer of 2004. Most of the games I mentioned were all fighting in the same arena as World of Warcraft, but almost none of them also asked you to have internet and pay a monthly sub. In 2004 I did not have internet. I did not have internet years later. And as far as the sub goes, no freaking way I could have ever made my parents agree. And I know this situation is not unique. Maybe most of you had internet, okay, but I know the monthly sub was a hard sell for most people. Hell, it still is a hard sell today, and the price did not change at all. $15 in 2004 was insane. So World of Warcraft managed to do all of that within this insane context. But on top of all of it, there is a considerable number of people that would have wanted to play the game but just couldn't do it. You have to imagine that if the game was a one-time purchase, it would have been even bigger. The potential is not... We don't even see its full potential in the numbers from 2004. We all heard that World of Warcraft crushed the MMO genre, and while that is true, it crushed more than that, and it did all of it in the harshest environment imaginable. Playing the game itself and understanding the time it came out in is all you need to see how good it was, but talking about how it did it and analyzing these absolute insane achievements is also more than enough to understand why this game is beyond legendary. It is very hard to say that any game is the best game ever made, and I will not say that about World of Warcraft, but I will say this: it is a goddamn good competitor for that title, and I cannot think of any other game with such a brutal path to greatness. And people ask themselves, why do we talk about Classic Plus so much? Imagine this great game getting even better and even bigger, or at least that is the hope. Anyway guys, let me know how you feel in the comments down below. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and thank you so much if you watched all the way through. And until the next time, peace!